400,000 pounds. That's the size of the pension pot the Independent Pensions Policy Institute says you now need just to cover rent in retirement. And if that number just made your stomach drop, you are not alone, because most people your age don't have anywhere close to that saved. And the system is not going to warn you before it becomes your problem. Stay with me until the third figure I give you, because that's the one that shows exactly what happens if you're renting a slightly nicer place than a bedsit. And the number is genuinely frightening. I'm going to walk you through this like a financial planner would sit down with you at a kitchen table. Because this isn't a headline designed to scare you for clicks. It's based on real research. And DWP and the wider pensions industry are not exactly rushing to put this on a leaflet through your door. The state pension isn't built to cover rent. It was never designed to. And that gap between what you'll have and what you'll need is exactly what nobody sits you down and explains. There are several numbers in this that most renters heading toward retirement have never seen side by side. So let's go through them one by one, and remember, stick around for the couple's figure on a mid-range rental, because that's the one that should really change how you're planning right now. For years, the conversation about property in this country has been about young people struggling to get on the ladder. That's real. But there's a second crisis quietly building at the other end of life, among people who are already renting, or who rented for years and assumed something would sort itself out by the time they retired. Some of them believe a council will simply house them. Some assume their pension will somehow stretch further than it will. Neither of those is a safe bet, and the research backing this up is blunt about it. The Independent Pensions Policy Institute modeled what a renter actually needs in retirement once you account for the fact that 400,000 pounds doesn't just cover rent, it also has to stretch across council tax, food, energy bills, and everyday living costs on top of it. So they broke it down by actual rent levels. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. If you're renting somewhere at 700 pounds a month, which barely gets you a small flat in most parts of the country now, a single person retiring would need a pension pot of 173,000 pounds just to make that work through retirement. A couple in the same situation would need 211,000 pounds because two people simply cost more to keep, even in a modest home. Compare that to what people are actually retiring with today. The average pension pot for someone retiring right now sits at roughly 154,000 pounds. That's not close to 173,000 pounds, and it's a long way short of 211,000 pounds. This is next. Push the rent up slightly to 850 pounds a month, which is closer to a realistic two-bedroom rental in a lot of the country, and a single person now needs 210,000 pounds. A couple needs 255,000 pounds. Almost everyone assumes those small increases in rent don't make much difference over a whole retirement. They do, and the compounding effect is brutal. Now here's the number I told you to wait for. Rent at 1,170 pounds a month, which is genuinely modest by city standards, pushes a single person's required pot up to 288,000 pounds. For a couple, it climbs to 351,000 pounds. This is the one I told you to stay for, because it shows that even people who think they're being sensible with a mid-range rental are still hundreds of thousands of pounds short of what they'll actually need. And most of them have no idea. Let me bring this down to one person, because numbers on their own don't land the same way. Picture someone like Brian, 62, been renting his whole adult life, never quite managed a deposit, always told himself the state pension plus a small workplace pot would see him through. Brian's built up around 140,000 pounds in his pension, which sounds like a reasonable amount to a lot of people. But Brian's renting a modest two-bed at 850 pounds a month. He needs 210,000 pounds just to make that sustainable through retirement, not accounting for care needs later on, not accounting for rent increases, which are coming whether he plans for them or not. Brian is 70,000 pounds short, and nobody at his pension provider is going to ring him up and tell him that. This next part matters just as much as the money, because it's about what happens to home ownership itself. The same research forecasts that by 2044, the proportion of retired people who own their home outright will fall from 79% today down to 64%. At the same time, the proportion of retirees who are renting is expected to climb from 6% up to 18%. That's not a small shift. That's a structural change in how retirement looks in this country within 20 years. And here's the part that should worry you even if you already own your home. Among pensioners who own their property outright, 12% are living in poverty. Among pensioners who rent, that figure jumps to 35%. Owning your home, even one that hasn't shot up hugely in value once you account for inflation, still means your core housing cost effectively disappears once the mortgage is paid off. Renters never get that. Rent doesn't stop rising just because you've retired. This next fact affects far more people than most realize. Councils are already under enormous financial pressure from housing costs, and this research is warning that a growing wave of renting pensioners unable to cover their own housing costs from a pension could push local authority housing budgets to breaking point over the next 2 decades. There's no fully funded plan in place for that right now, which means the honest answer is that either taxes rise significantly to cover it, or a lot of people in retirement end up in situations nobody would choose for themselves. So what do you actually do with this? If you own a property now, even a modest one, the research is clear that holding on to it rather than selling up and renting instead makes a measurable difference to your risk of poverty in retirement, because your monthly outgoings shrink dramatically once it's paid off. If you're renting and don't currently have a realistic route to ownership, the priority becomes maximizing pension contributions, specifically to close the gap between what you'll have and what the research shows renters actually need, which, as you've just heard, is a much bigger number than most people assume. And if you're not sure where your own pension currently stands against these figures, checking your state pension forecast and any workplace pension statements you have is the first concrete step, because you can't plan for a gap you haven't measured. So here's where this leaves you. The numbers are not designed to frighten you for the sake of it. They're designed to give you a realistic target, because £154,000, the average pot right now, simply doesn't meet any of the rental scenarios we've just gone through, not even the cheapest one. If you know someone who's renting and coasting toward retirement, assuming it'll somehow work out, send them this today, because this is the kind of gap that's much easier to close at 50 than at 65. And if you want to stay ahead of exactly this kind of pension and housing research before it becomes a personal problem rather than a headline, subscribe now so you catch the next update before the numbers change again, not after you've already fallen behind them. Homeownership used to be the finish line. Increasingly, it looks like the only safety net. Plan accordingly.